Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest. But before I do that, here's a quote that I picked just for this podcast episode. Here we go. I'm going to read two of them because I don't really like this one and I don't understand it, but I'm going to read this one first. So long as the spectator has to figure out the meaning of this or that person, or the presuppositions of this or that conflict of inclinations and purposes, he cannot become completely absorbed in the activities and sufferings of the chief characters or feel breathless pity and fear. Ooh, I do get it now. Never mind. Let's just use that one. Friedrich Nietzsche. My dear friend Brian Hess is back again. Part of the Culture Matters family, friend, mentor, advisor to many, founder of the Pavement Group, the top contractor school, someone you wouldn't want to mess with at a bar if he had to defend a damsel in distress. We're doing this on a Sunday, so he gets things done. I just found out it's not Labor Day, but it's pretty close to it. I'm in a chipper mood today to see Brian. Thanks for coming on to talk about the value of conflict. And we got to unpack this quote a little bit.
Yeah, that's a complex quote, man. That's a long one.
I'm going to text it to you too, because this is unfair in a sense. But before we go into the quote, what when the value of conflict? Someone listening to this might think conflict, that doesn't sound good. So how do you address that firstly? Unless there's other things you want to say.
Yeah, I think there is probably a strong sense of negativity towards conflict in general in our country. And I think it's one of the things that's making our society and culture weaker, is that, people don't understand how to argue or how to debate or how to have conversations around their differences. And, from what I've found over the last, 5 years, specifically 5.5 years building the Pavement Group and Top Contractor School, it is, conflict that reveals most of the growth that we've had, so much of what we've been able to have. And I also think that conflict is something that people view as, you've got to be, angry at each other, or you've got to be raising your voice, or you've got, all the negative connotations of how people would view conflict. It's just not true, right? Conflict is open and honest communication, being transparent, telling people, what you don't like or what could be better, or, all of those things are avoided so much in our society. And I think it leads to less growth, less progress, softer people, and ultimately a less full life when you don't, people that don't have conflict carry resentment instead. It's better to be open. It's better to tell people how you feel and have a conversation about it. And I think the other thing that really stands out about what I've learned about conflict is that it is present everywhere that there's exceptional performance. Whether that's sports, whether that's business, whether that's anywhere that you look that there's champions. It's not they're not people that just accept whatever it is. They're people that argue to get a better result. They're people that debate to get a better result, that have conversations to have a better result. And so to me, the value of conflict is immeasurable. I think that, those organizations that learn how to do conflict well are the ones that will last the test of time. The other thing I would say is that where there's no conflict, there is almost guaranteed to be resentment, because everyone has conflict inside of them that's unresolved.
Wow. The quote, the Peterson quote, conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. What do you unpack that?
Yeah, dude, I've experienced it in my own life. I think that many people are whether it's consciously or subconsciously, we're taught to avoid conflict. And so when you delay conflict, it just builds up this wall, this resistance, this lack of desire to actually resolve it, because the longer it goes, the less you care to resolve it, right? The longer it goes, you dig your heels in on something, but you don't really say anything. Next thing you know, it's a month, it's a year, it's several years, and nothing happens. And it is multiplied because it creates a division between two parties or multiple parties. And then there's a whole facet of ego that gets involved there. It's like, who's going to crack first to have the conversation, right? And so I believe psychologically there's a whole lot of truth to that quote, right? That conflict is multiplied when it's ignored. I mean, that's a fact. And anybody who has been in some point of conflict that has taken longer than a few hours to resolve can relate to that.
As it relates to the gatherings of people in business, what in your breadth of experience has been like for the audience, right? Ways to have conversation that creates value versus take away value.
Well, I think the first part of getting good at conflict and having conversations is that the leader and leadership must demonstrate that, must be open and constantly be working toward more openness, right? Because no matter how open we are, I've experienced this recently. It's like you take big leaps in a positive direction, and the way that people view you changes. And so you have to work harder to create openness, right? You have to be more aware to create openness, because people put you on a different level in their own mind. It's not that you're maybe you are behaving differently, but maybe you're not. And maybe the people around you just view you differently. And so I think that, the first part of having productive communication really is about the culture. It's like, if you were to look at your organization, what percentage of it would you consider to be yes people, or what percentage of it would you say are open, are willing to challenge whatever is being said from whoever it's being said by? And that's a complex thing, and it doesn't happen very often. It's a societal structure that isn't often enough challenged. I just had this conversation with Kevin the other day about the current day organizational chart is really inverted, right? It's like, if you look at it the old fashioned way, it's a traditional triangle with 2 points on the bottom and 1 point on the top. But in today's world, the way that a business should function, it should feel the opposite, right? Where the 2 points are at the top, and the quote unquote leader is at the bottom, and that is what servant leadership looks like. And I think servant leadership is the first step in the right direction toward creating openness and creating the ability for people to be comfortable enough to have the conflict. And because they're taught in their family structure, they're taught in previous business experience, people are taught everywhere to avoid it.
Let's look at this quote for a second. You got it?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to read it here. So long as the spectator has to figure out the meaning of this or that person, or the presuppositions of this or that conflict of inclinations and purposes, he cannot become completely absorbed in the activities and sufferings of the chief characters, or feel breathless pity and fear.
It's a really complex quote, man, because it's almost like the last part and the first part are almost uniquely different, right? So long as the spectator has to figure out the meaning of this or that person.
Right. Or the presupposition of this or that conflict of inclinations and purposes. He cannot become completely absorbed in the activities and sufferings of the chief characters. I get the vibe that he's trying to speak to this it's like, in this context at least, where we lose ourselves in the focus of the other, or we're like, it's like if we're having a conversation together, we're on the same team, and we might be trying to get to the same goal, but somewhere along the way now we're adversaries because of how you said something to me or how I said something to you. Or that's like one way I'm interpreting this.
Yeah, I think there's far too much that is presupposed in general in people, in conflict, and there's, that leads to the lack of listening, which is what resolves conflict, right? And so when you look at that, he cannot become completely absorbed in the activities and sufferings of the chief characters, or feel breathless pity and fear. The last part, I think, is the most interesting, or feel breathless pity and fear. I think that's what happens a lot of times in conflict. And that's why people don't have healthy conflict, is that the person that's being, the person or situation that's being discussed, the person assumes this, in the words of Nietzsche, breathless pity and fear. It's like, no, our job is to become better human beings. Our responsibility is to listen. Our responsibility is to seek first to understand, not be understood. And so, I think that, when we fall into that breathless pity and fear, like people don't understand me, or that's not what I meant, or, they're taking this the wrong way. It's like, it doesn't really matter in the realm of conflict, in the realm of, communication. It doesn't really matter how we mean to come across. Perception from the other person sometimes is, becomes, to some degree, it could be argued, but to some degree, it becomes our responsibility, right? Because you have to understand the person you're communicating with. It's a very complex thing. That's why conflict is so healthy, because every time you argue, you understand the other person better. You understand where they're coming from. And by the way, on the realm of, on a scale of 1 to 10, how open somebody is, that's one part of it. Then their personality traits are the other part. How forward are they going to be with their conflict or their argument or their, right? Because there's a personality factor to this, where we have to pull it out of people sometimes. And that doesn't, by the way, it doesn't make them wrong for being that way. It's just their personality, right? And so by understanding how to execute conflict, we can hopefully expand the best parts of their personality, right? And help them understand the other person. But it takes the openness and willingness to disagree, to have that happen. And so that, for me, that's been the greatest value of conflict for me, is every time I have it, I just understand the people around me that much better. And I think they understand me. It's like, and by the way, I've never had one of these situations where at the end of it, where I didn't believe all parties were better, not just me, right? Not just my position was better, because I don't win every conflict. I don't, and by the way, I don't intend to win. That's not, I think that's another.
It's interesting. If anyone wins, then what did we lose along the way?
Right, exactly. And so that can't be the intention. It's not to win. It's to be understood and to understand. And, that's something that we don't do far often enough. I think we're living in a world, man, where the technology and all the daily activity that we have, and the amount of information that's flowing in and out of our brains, is restricting us from being human and listening and processing and really leaning into the human aspect of what's happening. I believe, I say this in everything that we do at the Pavement Group. We're a very technology driven company, but I believe the future of success in business is the combination of technology driven, really innovative at every place that you can be, but it has to be partnered with the old fashioned values of shaking people's hands, keeping your word. And in this case, listening and having conversation, right? Because we can market to a point of not having to talk to people.
I think this is part one of conflict, the value conflict. In closing, what can the audience look forward to part two?
Oh, I think we should pull apart the different types of conflict, how they arise, how they actually tactically get resolved. What does that look like from a leadership standpoint? What role can the leader play in, I don't want to say promoting conflict, but when it exists, promoting the finalization of it, right? Promoting, seeing that through to a conclusion. And how do you actually do that? Because it's a very sensitive thing. Like if you get this wrong, conflict can be a really bad thing. And understanding how to do it well is a real talent, and it's a real secret weapon in business and in life.